For most of human existence, there were no cities, no written records, no monuments of stone rising above the land. Yet humanity was already old. Long before the first civilizations appeared, human beings had already walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years, observing, remembering, adapting, and surviving in a world vastly different from the one we know today. Modern history often begins its story around 5,000 years ago, with the rise of writing, agriculture, and organized states. This moment is commonly described as the birth of civilization. But in truth, it represents something else entirely. It marks the point when history began to be recorded, not when humanity began to exist. For more than 95% of our past, human life unfolded without written words, without permanent cities, and without the institutions we now associate with civilization. During this immense stretch of time, generations lived and died without leaving behind texts, chronicles, or official histories. And yet, they were not absent from history. They were history. To understand the world before civilization, we must first challenge a deeply ingrained assumption that civilization is synonymous with progress, and that everything before was simple, primitive, or incomplete. Archaeology tells a different story. Across continents and climates, evidence reveals that early humans possessed complex social structures, deep knowledge of their environments, sophisticated tools, symbolic thinking, and rich spiritual lives. They navigated vast landscapes, tracked the movements of animals across seasons, read the sky for timekeeping, and passed knowledge orally across generations. These were not accidental survivors. They were deliberate societies. The world they inhabited was shaped by forces far greater than any empire that would later rise. Massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels were dramatically lower, exposing coastlines and land bridges that no longer exist. Entire regions that are now submerged beneath the oceans were once home to human communities. This was a dynamic world, one of shifting climates, changing ecosystems, and constant adaptation. Human beings did not merely endure these changes. They learned from them. They developed technologies suited not for permanence, but for mobility. They formed networks of trade and exchange that stretched across vast distances. They created art, ritual, and shared meaning long before writing was invented to record such things. In caves, on stone surfaces, and within burial sites, traces of early belief systems remain. Symbols carved tens of thousands of years ago still speak of identity, memory, and an understanding of existence beyond survival alone. These were people who thought deeply about life, death, and the world around them. Civilization, when it finally emerged, did not appear suddenly or spontaneously. It was not a single moment of discovery, nor a sharp break from a primitive past. It was the result of countless generations of accumulated knowledge. Knowledge developed long before the first cities were built. To explore the world before civilization is not to romanticize the past, nor to deny the achievements of later societies. It is to place them in proper context. It is to recognize that agriculture, cities, and writing were not the beginning of intelligence, culture, or organization, but rather new expressions of abilities that already existed. This documentary journeys back to that forgotten world, a world before borders and nations, before kings and laws, before temples dominated skylines and history was written by the powerful. We will explore how early humans lived, how they organized their societies, how they understood time and space, and how they adapted to an ever-changing planet. We will examine the landscapes they walked, the tools they shaped, and the knowledge they preserved without ink or paper, but through memory and tradition. And in doing so, we will begin to understand a truth often overlooked. Civilization did not create humanity. Humanity created civilization. To understand where we are today, we must first understand the world that existed before civilization began. This is the story of that world. Before cities existed, for most of human history, There were no cities, no permanent streets, no towering buildings, no centralized governments or written laws. Yet humanity did not exist in chaos. Long before cities reshaped the landscape, human societies were already structured, organized, and deeply connected to the world around them. For hundreds of thousands of years, people lived in ways that modern history often oversimplifies, labeling them as primitive or undeveloped. Archaeology, however, reveals a far more complex reality. Early human societies were not defined by what they lacked, but by what they understood. They lived in small to medium-sized groups, often composed of extended families bound together by kinship and shared survival strategies. These communities were flexible, adapting their size and movement to the seasons, available resources, and environmental conditions. Mobility was not a weakness, it was an advantage. Rather than exhausting the land through permanent settlement, early humans moved with ecosystems following animal migrations, seasonal plant growth, and climate cycles. This required an intimate knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and animal behavior, passed down carefully through generations. Such knowledge could not be written. It had to be remembered. Hunter-gatherer societies are often portrayed as living day-to-day, focused only on immediate survival. In reality, survival required long-term planning. Food was stored, tools were repaired and refined. Campsites were revisited seasonally, sometimes for centuries. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans selected specific locations, repeatedly places with access to water, shelter, and strategic vantage points. These were not random choices, but decisions rooted in experience and shared memory. Social cooperation was essential. Large game hunting, in particular, demanded coordination, communication, and trust. No single individual could bring down massive animals alone. Success depended on collective effort, roles assigned, strategies agreed upon, risks shared. This cooperation extended beyond hunting. Care for the injured, elderly, and young has been documented in fossil remains. Individuals with severe injuries or disabilities survived long after they could no longer hunt, indicating that others supported them. Such care reflects not only empathy, but social responsibility. These societies valued individuals beyond their immediate productivity. Trade networks also existed far earlier than once believed. Materials such as obsidian, shells, and pigments have been found hundreds of kilometers away from their original sources. This indicates long-distance exchange between groups' connections that formed early social networks across regions. Ideas, not just objects, traveled along these routes. Techniques for tool-making, hunting strategies, and symbolic practices spread from one group to another. Over time, this exchange contributed to shared cultural traditions across vast landscapes. Art and symbolism played a central role in early societies. Cave paintings, carvings, and decorative objects appear tens of thousands of years before cities. These were not casual creations. Many were placed deep within caves, far from daily living spaces, suggesting ritual significance. Animals, human figures, and abstract symbols appear repeatedly, hinting at shared belief systems and mythic narratives. These images were likely not decorative, but communicative expressions of identity, spirituality, and worldview. Burial practices provide further insight. The dead were often buried with care, sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, or pigments. This suggests an understanding of death not as an end, but as a transition, an idea central to many later civilizations. Memory mattered. Without writing, history was preserved through storytelling, ritual, and repetition. Elders passed down knowledge orally about landscapes, ancestors, seasonal changes, and social norms. These stories anchored communities to their past and guided future generations. Oral tradition was not casual storytelling. It was a system of knowledge preservation. Accuracy was maintained through repetition, ritual, and communal correction. In many traditional societies, stories were structured in ways that made them easier to remember, using rhythm, symbolism, and narrative patterns. This allowed knowledge to survive for centuries, even millennia. Leadership in early societies did not resemble later kingship. Authority was often situational, based on experience, skill, or wisdom, rather than inherited power. A skilled hunter might lead during hunts, while an elder guided spiritual or social matters. Power was fluid, not centralized. This flexibility helped prevent rigid hierarchies and allowed communities to adapt quickly to change. Decisions were often collective, reinforcing social cohesion. The absence of cities did not mean the absence of culture. It meant culture expressed itself differently through movement, memory, and shared experience rather than permanent architecture. The landscape itself became a living map, filled with meaning, stories, and ancestral significance. Rivers, mountains, caves, and plains were not merely physical features. They were places of memory, markers of events, rituals, and identity. In many ways, these early societies were deeply sustainable. Their way of life was shaped by limits, ecological boundaries that encouraged balance rather than domination. Overexploitation threatened survival, so restraint became embedded in cultural practices. This balance would later be challenged as permanent settlements emerged. But before that transformation, humanity lived for tens of thousands of years in a world where survival, cooperation, and meaning were inseparable. Cities would eventually bring remarkable achievements: writing, engineering, governance, and large-scale organization. But they also introduced new problems: inequality, environmental strain, and centralized power. To understand civilization fully, we must first understand what came before it. The world before cities was not empty. It was not simple. And it was not forgotten. It was the foundation upon which all later civilizations were built. In the next chapter, we will explore how early human intelligence evolved, how language, memory, and abstract thinking allowed these societies to thrive long before civilization took shape. Human intelligence and the rise of cognition, long before cities rose from the ground, and long before words were carved into stone or written on clay. The most important transformation in human history had already taken place. It occurred not in architecture or technology, but in the human mind. Human intelligence did not emerge suddenly. It evolved slowly, shaped by survival, cooperation, and the demands of an unpredictable world. Over hundreds of thousands of years, early humans developed cognitive abilities that allowed them to think beyond the present moment, to remember the past, anticipate the future, and imagine realities that did not yet exist. This capacity for abstract thought would become the foundation of everything that followed. Early humans were not merely reacting to their environment, they were interpreting it. They learned to recognize patterns in nature's seasonal changes, animal behavior, the movement of the stars. These patterns allowed them to predict events before they happened. Knowing when animals migrated, when plants bore fruit, or when harsh weather would arrive meant the difference between survival and extinction. Prediction required memory. Memory required structure. And structure required intelligence. Archaeological evidence shows a gradual increase in tool complexity over time. Early stone tools were simple, designed for immediate use. Later tools became more refined, specialized, and standardized, suggesting planning, teaching, and shared knowledge. Tools were not invented repeatedly by accident. They were learned, improved, and passed down. This transmission of knowledge required communication. While spoken language leaves no direct fossil record, its existence can be inferred through behavior. Coordinated hunting, complex tool-making, and social rituals all depend on some form of structured communication. Language did more than convey instructions. It allowed ideas to be shared. With language came the ability to describe events not immediately present, to talk about what had happened, what might happen, and what should happen. This expanded human awareness beyond the present moment. creating a shared mental world within communities. This shared world was essential for cooperation. As human groups grew larger, social relationships became more complex. Individuals needed to remember alliances, obligations, kinship ties, and social norms. Managing these relationships required advanced cognitive skills, empathy, perspective-taking, and emotional regulation. These abilities allowed early humans to function within tightly knit social systems. Social intelligence was as important as physical strength. Those who could understand others, resolve conflict, and maintain cooperation improved not only their own survival chances, but the survival of the group as a whole. Over time, such traits were reinforced and refined. Symbolic thinking marked another major cognitive leap. Symbols allow meaning to be stored and transmitted beyond direct experience. A symbol can represent an object, an idea, or a belief without physically being present. This ability underlies language, art, and religion. The earliest symbolic artifacts, engraved bones, ochre pigments, carved objects, appear tens of thousands of years before civilization. These items were not tools for survival. They were tools for meaning. Art was not decoration alone. It was communication. Cave paintings depict animals, human figures, and abstract patterns that appear across regions and time periods. The consistency of themes suggests shared symbolic systems, early forms of mythology, identity, and worldview. Such symbols likely played a role in teaching, ritual, and social cohesion. Belief systems emerged alongside symbolic thought. Early humans sought explanations for natural phenomena, storms, eclipses, birth, death. Without scientific frameworks, meaning was constructed through stories, rituals, and shared interpretations of the world. These early belief systems were not irrational. They were cognitive frameworks. They provided structure, moral guidance, and a sense of belonging. They helped communities cope with uncertainty and loss, reinforcing social bonds. Ritual behavior further demonstrates advanced cognition. Rituals require repetition, symbolism, and shared understanding. Archaeological sites show evidence of repeated ceremonial use locations, revisited across generations for gatherings, burials, or symbolic acts. These practices reinforced collective memory. Memory in early human societies was not individual alone. It was communal. Knowledge was stored not in books, but in people. Elders served as living repositories of experience, remembering migration routes, ecological changes, and ancestral history. This knowledge was transmitted orally through stories, songs, and rituals. Such systems were remarkably resilient. Oral traditions could preserve information for thousands of years, especially when embedded within cultural practices. Accuracy was maintained through repetition, communal correction, and the authority of tradition. This collective intelligence allowed human societies to adapt to changing environments. As climates shifted and landscapes transformed, early humans adjusted their behavior accordingly. They altered migration patterns, diversified food sources, and developed new technologies. Adaptation required flexibility of thought. Rather than relying on rigid structures, early cognition favored creativity and problem solving. When faced with scarcity or danger, humans experimented, testing new tools, strategies, and social arrangements. This adaptability would later enable the transition to agriculture, settlement, and civilization. But before those changes, human intelligence had already reached extraordinary levels. By the time the first permanent settlements appeared, humans were already capable of complex planning, abstract reasoning, symbolic communication, and deep social cooperation. Civilization did not create intelligence. Intelligence made civilization possible. Understanding this reshapes how we view the past. It challenges the idea that progress is linear and that earlier societies were inherently inferior. Instead, it reveals a long continuum of cognitive development, one that laid the ground for every achievement that followed. In the next chapter, We will step into the world that shaped this intelligence, the Ice Age environment itself. A world of vast glaciers, shifting coastlines, and dramatic climate changes that forced humanity to adapt, innovate, and survive on a planetary scale. The Ice Age world, for much of humanity's early existence, the world was shaped by ice. Not a single frozen moment, but a vast span of time, marked by advancing glaciers, retreating ice sheets, rising and falling seas, and dramatic shifts in climate. What is commonly called the Ice Age was not one event, but a series of long glacial periods, punctuated by warmer interval cycles that repeated over hundreds of thousands of years. During these periods, the Earth looked profoundly different. Massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, extending across large portions of North America, Europe, and Asia. In some regions, ice rose several kilometers thick, reshaping landscapes through immense pressure and slow, relentless movement. Mountains were carved, valleys deepened, and entire ecosystems transformed. Sea levels dropped dramatically. As water became locked in ice, the world's oceans receded, exposing vast stretches of land that are now submerged. Coastlines extended far beyond their present boundaries. Continental shelves became habitable terrain. Land bridges formed, connecting regions that today are separated by water. The world was larger than it is now. These changes did not occur overnight. They unfolded gradually over generations. Early humans did not experience them as sudden catastrophes, but as slow transformations, coastlines shifting, climates cooling, familiar environments changing shape. To survive in such a world required extraordinary adaptability. Temperatures fluctuated widely. In glacial periods, vast regions became colder, drier, and more challenging to inhabit. Forests retreated. Grasslands expanded. Large animals, mammoths, bison, woolly rhinoceroses roamed open plains, following seasonal patterns shaped by climate and vegetation. Human groups followed these patterns closely. Migration was not random wandering. It was a deliberate response to environmental cues. Early humans learned to move with the seasons, tracking animal herds, plant cycles, and weather patterns across immense distances. These movements created some of the earliest global networks. As groups migrated, they encountered new environments, deserts, tundra, forests, coastlines, and adapted their lifestyles accordingly. Tools changed, clothing evolved, shelter designs reflected local conditions, cultural practices shifted to match new realities. The Ice Age world demanded flexibility. Survival depended not only on physical endurance, but on collective knowledge. Understanding where to find food, how to survive extreme cold, and when to move was essential. Mistakes could be fatal. Success depended on memory, communication, and cooperation. Fire became central to life. Beyond warmth and cooking, fire provided protection from predators and extended the usable hours of the day. Control of fire allowed humans to inhabit colder regions that would otherwise be unlivable. It also became a focal point of social life, a place for gathering, teaching, and storytelling. Shelter evolved alongside climate pressures. Temporary camps were constructed using available materials: wood, bone, hides, and stone. In colder regions, dwellings were designed to retain heat and withstand harsh winds. Some structures were reused seasonally, becoming familiar landmarks within migratory routes. These campsites formed the backbone of early human geography. The Ice Age also reshaped the planet's waterways. Rivers changed course as glaciers advanced and retreated. Meltwater carved new channels and flooded lowlands. Lakes formed and disappeared. These water systems influenced where humans could live, hunt, and travel. Access to fresh water was critical. Many early settlements clustered near rivers, lakes, and coastal zones, not for permanence, but for predictability. These locations provided food, water, and natural pathways through the landscape. Coastal environments were particularly significant. With lower sea levels, Ancient coastlines extended far beyond modern shores. These regions offered abundant resources: fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and relatively stable food supplies. Evidence suggests that coastal living may have supported dense human populations long before inland civilizations emerged. Much of this world is now underwater. Submerged landscapes once hosted human activity camps, travel routes, and seasonal settlements, now lost beneath rising seas as the Ice Age ended. This loss has shaped modern understanding of early history, leaving gaps in the archaeological record. What we know is incomplete. Climate instability defined the Ice Age experience. Rapid temperature shifts occurred within relatively short time frames, forcing humans to adapt quickly. Cold periods could last thousands of years, followed by warmer phases that transformed ecosystems once again. These fluctuations acted as powerful selective pressures. Groups that could innovate, cooperate, and adjust survived. Those that could not disappeared. Over time, this process refined human adaptability, resilience, and problem-solving ability. The Ice Age world also influenced permanent settlements that existed before cities and monuments built before agriculture fully took hold. Permanent settlements before cities. For a long time, history taught a simple sequence. First came agriculture, then permanent settlements, then cities, and finally civilization. This sequence appears logical, orderly, and inevitable. But archaeology has revealed a far more complex and far more surprising reality. Permanent settlements did not emerge as a consequence of civilization. They emerged before it. Long before the first cities rose, long before writing systems or centralized states, human beings were already gathering in fixed locations, returning to the same places across generations, and investing labor into structures that served no immediate survival function. These were not cities, but they were not temporary camps either. They occupied a space between movement and permanence, a transitional phase in human history that reshaped how people related to land, time, and one another. The existence of such settlements challenges one of the most deeply held assumptions about the human past. Humans did not settle down because they learned to farm. In many cases, they learned to farm because they had already settled down. One of the most striking examples of this reversal lies in southeastern Anatolia, at a site now known as Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the late 20th century, Göbekli Tepe dates back more than 11,000 years, thousands of years before the appearance of agriculture or pottery in the region. Yet what stands there defies expectations. Massive stone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, were carved, transported, and arranged into circular enclosures. The pillars are adorned with reliefs of animals, foxes, snakes, birds, and wild cattle rendered with remarkable skill and consistency. These structures were not homes. They were not fortifications. They were not storage facilities. They were ceremonial spaces. Göbekli Tepe suggests that organized, large-scale construction was already possible among hunter-gatherer societies. Hundreds of people would have been required to quarry stone, transport it across uneven terrain, and erect it with precision. Such coordination implies planning, leadership, and shared purpose. Even more striking is what Göbekli Tepe lacks. There is no evidence of agriculture at the site. No domesticated plants. No domesticated animals. What if I told you that everything you learned about the dawn of civilization might be wrong? We've all heard the story. Humans roamed the earth as hunter-gatherers, and they discovered farming, settled down, and boom, civilization was born. Agriculture was the spark. But what if the real story is far more fascinating and much more human? What if the first permanent settlements weren't built for farming, but for something else entirely? Something deep within our social and spiritual nature. Let's travel back in time, way back to a period over 12,000 years ago. The world was a different place, just emerging from the last ice age. Our ancestors were incredibly skilled hunter-gatherers. They weren't struggling to survive in the way we often imagine. They had an intimate knowledge of their environment, knew the seasons, the animal migrations, the edible plants. In many ways, they had a pretty good life. Some studies suggest they only worked a few hours a day to secure their food. So why would they give up this nomadic freedom for the back-breaking labor of farming and the confines of a single location? For a long time, the answer seemed obvious. Agriculture provided a more reliable food source, allowing populations to grow and settle. This is what we call the Neolithic Revolution. It's a neat and tidy story. But groundbreaking archaeological discoveries have completely turned this idea on its head. The first piece of this incredible puzzle is a site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. It's a name you should remember because it rewrites history. Dating back to around 9,600 BC, Göbekli Tepe is a collection of massive, intricately carved stone pillars arranged in circles. Some of these pillars are 18 feet tall and weigh up to 16 tons. The carvings depict animals like lions, boars, foxes, and birds. It is, without a doubt, the world's first known temple, and it's staggering in its complexity. Now here's the kicker. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. There is absolutely no evidence of farming or domesticated animals at the site. This means that a large, organized workforce was mobilized to construct this monumental ritual, centuries long before anyone was planting wheat or herding goats. They quarried, transported, and carved these massive stones using only primitive tools. This would have required hundreds of people working together over a long period. So, what does this tell us? It suggests that the need for a central place to gather, to perform rituals, and to strengthen social bonds came first. People were traveling from miles around to this sacred spot. Imagine it, different bands of hunter-gatherers, who might have only seen each other occasionally, now had a common project, a shared spiritual center. This required coordination, planning, and a level of social organization we never thought possible for pre-agricultural societies. Building and maintaining a site like Göbekli Tepe would have presented a huge logistical challenge. How do you feed all those workers? You can't just rely on small hunting parties anymore. You need to organize large-scale feasts. And that's exactly what the evidence shows. Archaeologists have found the remains of tens of thousands of animal bones at the site, mostly from wild gazelles and aurochs. These weren't just leftovers from daily meals. They were the remnants of massive, ritualistic feasts. This creates a new kind of pressure. To support these large, periodic gatherings, people needed a more stable and predictable food supply nearby. The old ways of just following the herds weren't enough. They had to start managing their resources more intensively. Perhaps they started by protecting the wild grasses and cereals that grew around the site. They might have experimented with cultivating them to ensure a harvest for the next big gathering. And here we see the script flip. It wasn't that agriculture led to settlement and religion. It seems that the desire for communal ritual and social gathering, the very things that make us human, created the need for settlement, which in turn spurred the invention of agriculture. The temple came before the town. The feast came before the farm. Göbekli Tepe isn't an isolated case. Similar, though less spectacular, sites from the same period are being discovered across the region. At another site called Jericho, one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, the earliest structures include a massive stone tower and wall built around 9000 BC. Again, this monumental construction predates clear evidence of agriculture. What was it for? Defense? Maybe. But it also could have been a powerful social and symbolic statement, a way to define a community. This new perspective changes how we see our ancestors. They weren't just driven by the practical needs of their stomachs. They were driven by the needs of their souls, by the desire for community, for shared meaning, and for a connection to something larger than themselves. They were building a society before they were building farms. The deep human need to belong, to share stories, and to participate in rituals was the true engine of civilization. Think about it in our own lives. We build community centers, stadiums, churches, and concert halls. We gather for holidays, festivals, and sporting events. These shared experiences are the glue that holds our societies together. It seems this has been a fundamental part of the human experience for a very, very long time. So the next time you see a field of wheat or a modern city skyline, remember the story isn't as simple as it seems. The journey to where we are today wasn't a straight line from hunting to farming. It was a winding path, driven by the powerful, ancient human impulse to come together, to share, to celebrate, and to build something magnificent in the service of an idea. The foundation of our world isn't just mud and brick. It's ritual, community, and the shared quest for meaning. It is a powerful reminder that what truly defines us and drives our greatest achievements isn't just technology or economics, but our social and spiritual connections to one another. Thanks for watching, and if you found this perspective on history as fascinating as I do, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into our incredible past. See you next time. For most of human history, knowledge existed without writing. There were no books, no archives, no recorded laws, calendars, or scientific texts, and yet humanity remembered. Long before symbols were carved into stone or pressed into clay, entire systems of knowledge were preserved, transmitted, and refined across generations. This knowledge governed survival, social order, belief, and identity. It allowed societies to endure for thousands of years in changing environments without the aid of written records. Writing, when it eventually emerged, did not create knowledge. It merely changed how knowledge was stored. To understand the world before civilization, we must understand how early humans remembered. Memory was not individual alone. It was collective. In early societies, knowledge lived within people, within elders, storytellers, hunters, healers, and ritual leaders. Information was distributed across the community, embedded in social roles and cultural practices. This distribution made knowledge resilient. If one individual died, knowledge did not vanish. It existed in others, reinforced through repetition and shared experience. Survival demanded that critical information, migration routes, edible plants, dangerous animals, seasonal cycles be preserved accurately. Mistakes could mean death. As a result, early humans developed sophisticated systems for ensuring memory remained intact. Oral tradition was the backbone of this system. Stories were not told casually. They followed structured patterns designed to enhance recall rhythm, repetition, symbolism, and narrative sequencing. These features made stories memorable and resistant to distortion. In many traditional societies, stories could be recited word for word across generations. Accuracy was protected not through written verification, but through communal participation. Listeners corrected errors. Elders enforced consistency. Ritualized storytelling reinforced authority and meaning. Oral knowledge was living knowledge. It adapted when necessary, but preserved core truths essential to survival and identity. This balance between stability and flexibility allowed societies to respond to change without losing continuity. Knowledge was also encoded in landscape. Before maps existed, landscapes themselves became repositories of information. Rivers, mountains, caves, and plains were associated with events, ancestors, and lessons. Travel routes were memorized through stories tied to landmarks. The land became a mnemonic system. A journey was not just movement through space, but movement through memory. Each place recalled a story, a warning, or a teaching. This allowed navigation across vast territories without written directions. Astronomy played a crucial role. Early humans observed the sky with remarkable precision. The movement of the sun, moon, and stars provided reliable markers of time. Seasonal changes were tracked through celestial cycles, guiding migration, hunting, and ritual. Stone alignments, earthworks, and repeated ceremonial use of specific sites suggest an understanding of astronomical patterns long before formal science. This knowledge was practical. It ensured survival by predicting seasonal shifts and environmental changes. It also reinforced belief systems, connecting human life to cosmic order. Calendars existed before writing. They were not written down, but lived in ritual cycles, festivals, migrations, planting times, and ceremonies synchronized with celestial events. Time was experienced communally rather than recorded numerically. Ritual was another powerful vehicle of memory. Rituals preserved knowledge through action rather than explanation. By repeating specific movements, chants, or ceremonies, communities transmitted values and information without verbal instruction. Children learned by participation. Through ritual, social norms, moral codes, and cosmological beliefs were reinforced. Ritual transformed memory into embodied experience, knowledge felt rather than merely recalled. This embodied knowledge was difficult to erase. Music and song also played a role. Songs encoded information in melody and rhythm, making it easier to remember long sequences of data. In some cultures, songs functioned as oral maps, genealogies, or historical records. Sound became storage. Craft knowledge followed similar patterns. Tool-making techniques were taught through demonstration and repetition. Skills were refined over years of apprenticeship. Precision was maintained not through manuals, but through observation and correction. This ensured consistency. A poorly made tool was immediately apparent. Function acted as validation. Knowledge that failed was discarded. Knowledge that worked survived. Medicine developed within this system. Early humans identified medicinal plants, healing techniques, and treatments through experimentation and experience. This knowledge was passed down selectively, often guarded by specific individuals or lineages. Healing traditions combined observation with belief. While explanations differed from modern science, effectiveness mattered. Treatments that worked were remembered. Those that failed were forgotten. Over time, this produced surprisingly sophisticated medical knowledge. Social rules were preserved similarly. Without written laws, norms were enforced through custom, story, and consequence. Tales of past transgressions served as warnings. Praise and shame reinforced acceptable behavior. Justice was relational rather than institutional. This system worked best in smaller communities, where memory and reputation mattered. Everyone knew everyone else. Actions had lasting social impact. Genealogy was another critical form of memory. Knowing ancestry established identity, rights, and responsibilities. Lineage connected individuals to land, community, and history. Oral genealogies could stretch back dozens of generations. These genealogies preserved continuity. They explained who belonged, who led, and who carried certain responsibilities. In many cultures, ancestry was inseparable from cosmology and myth. Myths themselves were not mere fiction. They were narrative frameworks that encoded moral values, environmental knowledge, and historical memory. Myths explained origins, disasters, and transformations in symbolic language. Symbolism allowed complexity. By framing information metaphorically, myths preserved meaning, even when literal details faded. Flood myths, creation stories, and hero journeys often reflected real environmental events or social transitions. These stories survived because they mattered. Without writing, knowledge was inseparable from culture. It was not abstracted into separate disciplines. Science, religion, ethics, and survival existed as one integrated system. This integration allowed early societies to function holistically. Writing would later fragment knowledge into categories, but before that, understanding was unified. This system was not inferior to written knowledge. It was different. It prioritized adaptability, social cohesion, and lived experience over accumulation. It valued wisdom over data. When writing finally appeared, it transformed knowledge preservation, but it also introduced new vulnerabilities. Written records could be lost, destroyed, or controlled. Knowledge became centralized. Oral systems were decentralized. They belonged to the community, not institutions. They survived through participation rather than storage. Understanding knowledge without writing forces us to reconsider assumptions about progress. Early societies were not ignorant. They were deeply knowledgeable in ways modern systems often overlook. They remembered the world through stories, rituals, landscapes, and relationships. This memory shaped their survival and identity across millennia. In the next chapter, we will explore how these systems of knowledge, combined with environmental change and growing populations, led to a profound transformation that transitioned from early settlements to full civilization. A transformation that would forever alter how humanity lived, remembered, and ruled. The transition to civilization. Civilization did not begin with a single invention, a single discovery, or a single place. It emerged gradually through a series of interconnected changes that reshaped how humans lived, organized themselves, and understood the world. The transition from early settlements to civilization was not inevitable. It was the result of choices' responses to environmental pressures, social complexity, and the limits of older ways of life. For tens of thousands of years, humanity had thrived without cities. Communities were mobile or semi-permanent, social structures were flexible, and knowledge was preserved through memory rather than institutions. These systems were effective, resilient, and deeply adapted to their environments, but they were not without constraints. As populations grew and climates stabilized after the last ice age, new pressures began to emerge. Regions that had once supported scattered groups now hosted increasingly dense populations. Seasonal gatherings became longer. Temporary settlements became permanent. With permanence came accumulation. People began to own more than they could carry. Tools, dwellings, ritual objects, and food stores tied communities to place. Land became more than a resource, it became territory. This shift altered human relationships in fundamental ways. In mobile societies, social equality was reinforced by movement. If tensions arose or resources declined, groups could separate or relocate. Permanence removed this option. Conflicts had to be managed internally. Population density increased social complexity. More people living together meant more relationships to manage, more disputes to resolve, and more coordination required. Informal social rules, once sufficient for small groups, became strained under growing numbers. Leadership began to change. Where authority had once been situational and temporary, it now required continuity. Decision-making roles became more defined. Individuals who controlled resources, knowledge, or ritual gained influence. Hierarchy began to emerge, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical response to scale. At the same time, human interaction with the environment intensified. Permanent settlements encouraged greater manipulation of surrounding landscapes. Plants were protected, encouraged, and selectively harvested. Animals were corralled, followed, and gradually domesticated. Agriculture did not appear suddenly. It developed incrementally through experimentation and adaptation. Early cultivation was not immediately efficient. It required more labor and carried greater risk than foraging. But it offered one crucial advantage: predictability. Predictable food supported larger populations. As food production increased, population growth accelerated. This growth reinforced the need for further intensification of agriculture, creating a feedback loop that tied communities ever more tightly to land. This dependency carried consequences. Crop failure, drought, or flooding now posed existential threats to entire communities. Surpluses had to be managed carefully. Storage became essential. Protection of resources became a priority. Control over food became power. Those who managed storage, distribution, and irrigation gained authority. Economic roles differentiated. Some individuals specialized in farming, others in tool-making, ritual, administration, or defense. Specialization increased efficiency, but also inequality. Social divisions deepened. Access to resources became uneven. Property concepts emerged. Boundaries were defined. Conflict over land and water intensified. Defense structures appeared, not only against outsiders, but as symbols of control. At this stage, early cities began to take shape. Cities were not simply larger settlements. They represented a new form of social organization. Population density reached levels where personal relationships alone could no longer regulate behavior. New systems were required. Rules became formalized. Authority was institutionalized. Decision-making shifted from consensus to command. Writing emerged within this context. Contrary to popular belief, writing did not initially serve storytelling or historical record. Its earliest uses were administrative tracking resources, labor, and transactions. Writing was a tool of management. It allowed institutions to extend memory beyond individuals. Accounts could be stored, compared, and enforced. Power could be exercised across distance and time. This transformed society. Knowledge, once distributed across communities, became centralized. Institutions replaced elders as repositories of information. Law replaced custom. Bureaucracy replaced ritual consensus. The benefits were significant. Cities enabled large-scale cooperation, monumental architecture, complex engineering, organized trade networks, and cultural production on unprecedented scales. Civilizations produced art, science, philosophy, and technology that reshaped the human experience. But the costs were equally profound. Inequality became entrenched. Social mobility diminished. Environmental degradation intensified as landscapes were reshaped to support growing populations. Human life became increasingly regulated. Civilization demanded order, but order required control. Urban living distanced people from direct interaction with nature. Food production became abstracted. Knowledge fragmented into specialized disciplines. Social relationships extended beyond personal familiarity. Memory shifted. Where early societies remembered through story, ritual, and landscape, civilizations remembered through records, monuments, and institutions. History became written often by those in power. This altered whose stories survived. Civilization also changed humanity's relationship with time. In mobile societies, time was cyclical, marked by seasons, migrations, and rituals. In cities, time became linear, tracked by calendars, schedules, and administrative needs. Progress replaced continuity. Despite these changes, civilization did not erase humanity's earlier traits. Cooperation, creativity, symbolic thinking, and adaptability persisted. They were redirected, not destroyed. The same cognitive abilities that once supported survival in the Ice Age now supported urban complexity. Civilization was not a break from the past. It was a transformation of it. Understanding this transition challenges the notion of civilization as a clear improvement over what came before. It reveals trade-offs rather than triumphs. Early societies lost flexibility, but gained stability. They lost equality, but gained scale. They lost intimacy, but gained permanence. Civilization solved certain problems and created new ones. This realization forces a deeper question. If civilization is not the pinnacle of human development, but one phase in a longer continuum, then what lessons remain from the world before it? The early human past offers insights into sustainability, cooperation, and resilience that modern societies continue to struggle with. It reminds us that progress is not linear, and that complexity does not guarantee wisdom. The transition to civilization was not destiny. It was choice shaped by circumstance. And like all choices, it carried consequences that continue to shape the modern world. In understanding how civilization emerged, we gain the ability to question how it functions today and how it might evolve in the future. The world before civilization did not disappear. It lives on in our biology, our psychology, and our cultural memory. Civilization did not replace humanity. Humanity carried itself forward, changed, constrained, and expanded. To remember this is not to reject civilization, but to see it clearly. Remembering the world before civilization often tells its story as a beginning. The first cities, the first laws, the first written words. But as we have seen, civilization was not the beginning of humanity's story. It was a chapter that arrived late, built upon foundations laid over hundreds of thousands of years. Before cities, humanity already understood cooperation. Before writing, humanity already preserved knowledge. Before empires, humanity already created meaning. The world before civilization was not an empty prelude waiting to be replaced. It was a fully formed human experience, one shaped by memory, movement, adaptation, and shared identity. For most of our existence, humans lived in direct relationship with their environment. They learned its rhythms, respected its limits, and adapted to its changes. Knowledge was not stored in institutions, but carried in people. Memory was not written, but lived. This way of life produced resilience. When climates shifted, humans moved. When resources changed, they adapted. When challenges arose, they relied on cooperation rather than control. Civilization brought extraordinary achievements. It allowed humanity to build at scale, to preserve knowledge in durable forms, and to connect vast populations through shared systems. But it also narrowed something essential. As societies grew larger, relationships grew more distant. As knowledge became written, memory became external. As power centralized, equality diminished. The transition to civilization was not a victory or a failure. It was a trade. We gained permanence, but lost flexibility. We gained order, but accepted hierarchy. We gained history, but lost parts of memory. Understanding this does not require rejecting civilization. It requires seeing it clearly. The modern world often assumes that progress moves in only one direction, that complexity always improves wisdom, and that newer systems are inherently superior to older ones. But the deep human past challenges this assumption. Early societies were not less intelligent. They were intelligent differently. They understood balance rather than accumulation, continuity rather than expansion, community rather than institution. These values did not vanish with civilization. They were buried beneath its surviving in cultural traditions, social instincts, and the quiet persistence of human cooperation. Even today, traces of that ancient world remain. In our need for connection, in our instinct to tell stories, in our reliance on shared memory, ritual, and meaning. Civilization did not erase humanity's past. It layered itself upon it. To remember the world before civilization is not to romanticize it. Life was difficult, uncertain, and often harsh. But it was also deeply human-rooted in shared experience and mutual dependence. It reminds us that humanity's greatest strength has never been technology alone. It has been adaptability. It has been cooperation. It has been the ability to remember who we are, even without writing it down. As the modern world faces unprecedented challenges, environmental instability, social fragmentation, and accelerating change, the lessons of the deep past feel increasingly relevant. They remind us that resilience does not come from control alone, that knowledge does not exist only in data, and that progress without reflection can lead us away from wisdom rather than toward it. The world before civilization is not lost to time. It lives on in the questions we ask about our origins, in the myths that echo forgotten events, in the human capacity to adapt when systems fail. History, as written, begins with civilization, but humanity does not. And if we wish to understand where we are going, we must first remember where we came from. This documentary has explored a world shaped by ice and movement, by memory and meaning, by cooperation and choice. The past does not tell us what to do, but it does remind us of what is possible. History is not always written. Sometimes it is remembered. Explore, learn, remember.